everybody. Started in 2018 with the purpose of providing real-world application in how doctrine is established for the future fight. This extracurricular activity at the U.S. Naval Academy enhances education through live, virtual, constructive reinforcement. Less than 4 years later, Russia invaded Ukraine in a ground conflict not seen since the end of World War II, and what analysts would wrongly predict to be the fall of a sovereign nation within 2 weeks. Good afternoon. I'm Lieutenant Commander John Paramatalock, and I'm excited to be your moderator for the most junior panel at this conference. I served 3 years as the director and principal investigator for this program, but it's not about me. It's going to be about the panel members. We have 4 panel members here today with you with diverse majors. There's going to be 3 driving points to this: resilience, adaptiveness, and influence. There's 2 stats I want you to take away with. For technology, within 1 hour, there is an 80% failure rate for employment. Costs, when we talk about unmanned systems, can be as high as 5,000 to 1 to talk about asymmetric capabilities. And we have 1 hour to shape how industry and organizations view accession programs and its importance to view leadership development. Today's program is referred to as ARES, the Adaptive Rapid Engagement Squadron at the Naval Academy, and FAST, or Future Applied Systems Team at the Military Academy, with research focused on technology integration at the squad tactics level. So with the panel members today, we're going to start off by giving you a little background as far as, from their perspective, what this program has done for them, and we'll do brief introductions.
Good afternoon. I am Ensign Patrick Wilson. I spent 4 years at the Academy with the ARES team. I am currently the Experimentation Division Officer at U.S. VRON 3, Unmanned Surface Vessel Squadron 3. And what the team has done for me, mostly, is it was a major introduction into small unit leadership that I really didn't get anywhere else at the Academy. It was a hands-on learning experience where mistakes had genuine consequences, unlike anything that I had learned in the classroom. Aside from that, aside from my major, which was foreign area studies, completely unrelated to STEM, I got a very holistic background in unmanned systems and electronic warfare, again, that I did not get from the core curriculum.
Hello, everyone. First Lieutenant Andrew McCorson. I am the Marine Air Group 24S6 over in K-Bay. I was a weapons, robotics, and control systems engineering major at the Naval Academy. I spent 4 years on the team with these guys, starting in 2019, graduated class of 23. Likewise, right, robotics engineering, this particular team was a great application for my major. In fact, it was the reason why I switched out of aerospace into robotics. That and, aerospace engineering. So it was a great opportunity. We'll get more into it, but pass it over to T-Bird here.
Hello, I'm Lieutenant Junior Grade Brandon Burt. I also graduated in 2023 with McCorson, and I've been on the team since almost the start. I joined it because it was originally an airsoft club, or at least that's how it was advertised. We had one functioning quadcopter. By the time I left the team, I was coordinating multiple strikes with switchblade munitions under night vision goggles to initiate multi-angled raids and ambushes. So, Simulated, of course. With training rounds and all that. But huge explosion of evolution in technology and opportunities. Yeah.
Afternoon, Ensign Carson Shane, also graduated with Wilson, and I'm also working at U.S. VRON 3 as the Command and Control Division Officer. I was also on this program, this club. Really what it did was, again, the small unit tactics and really just the introduction to unmanned vessels or unmanned systems.
All right, there's going to be some technologies that we're going to talk about, and in no way are we endorsing any of these technologies. We were fortunate enough to be a research program and we're able to integrate a lot of these capabilities that these officers are going to talk about today. But how would you describe the program and its influence on you as a leader or preparedness for the fleet?
Okay. I've been commissioned for about 2 years now, and I've had very different assignments. I started off in flight school, where I was also responsible for a division of sailors that were also going through their aircrew training. And then I was an instructor in Great Lakes for Recruit Training Command for about 6 months, teaching academics. And now I'm in Navy Information Operations Command Pacific, where I lead a watch team. So very different from small unit tactics in the field, but the leadership principles all stand. Really learning to take care of your people, but also to get to know them. It's one thing to be in a classroom and be told you need to know your people, you need to know the rules, you need to be able to support them. It's very different when you've got a guy who's hypothermic and you're also in a situation where you don't want to get shot at in a simulated situation. That's a huge difference in learning. And that's really what this team provided. I've learned more about leadership with this program than in any other course or class I've ever taken. Thank you.
I'll second the leadership piece. In just my short time in the Navy, right, kind of a peculiar pipeline working with Unmanned Surface Vessel Squadron. I've actually haven't been to BDOC yet, for those familiar with the SWO pipeline. I went straight to Unmanned Surface Vessel Squadron, and it was sort of like graduation, and then day one, I'm leading people, I'm leading a division, and I'm dealing with those problems, right, that I had otherwise would not have been exposed to in a realistic sense. And then on top of that, with my job particularly as the experimentation division officer, working with contractors, right, interfacing with the CO, interfacing with higher echelons, right, getting those intents, working with contractors to develop payloads, and really it was kind of the same thing that I did with Ares as an R&D shop head. And so really like understanding the lingo, understanding like managing expectations, right? And then as those TRLs develop, right, working with those contractors, like to see those projects through, right? That's exactly what I did then. It's exactly what I do now. So it was a very much a very succinct, and it was a very solid continuity of responsibilities.
Just for me, for the leadership implications of this team, right? So we were just kind of given this mission, right? Integrate unmanned systems, integrate test technologies into an infantry squad, go out, slay West Point. Pretty simple. There was no structure to that. That was just a end state that we had to achieve. So for us, and for a lot of the guys here, like we just kind of made this organization all on our own. We had a team commander who sprung up. We had an informal two shop. We had this guy over here running the logistics for the team because in order to get to training, we had to have a way to get there, get the gear there, order the gear, maintain the gear. Like this whole organic system just kind of sprung up out of nothing. So for me, and as like a junior leader from this team, I kind of gained a little bit of that, I don't want to say egalitarian perspective, but like if you can align people's interests with the end state. So I have a person, he's passionate about networking in my current section. I took that guy away. He was up by the front door. He was getting tapped for help desk all the time. I just grabbed this guy. I shift him over. I say, hey, your new job is Coalition Networks, Centrix K. And suddenly he's just switched on and has just started running with it day in, day out, every single day. So aligning people and their passions towards an end state, that's something I took out of this team. I mean, Pat was like one of my underlings for I shouldn't say underlings, but like partners for the shop.
Minion.
And he took over for me when I left because we were just like, two pizzas in a pod. But I didn't, there's no formal tasking. He just said, all right, I want to help you out with projects. Cool. All right, we're going to keep running with it. I left, he takes over, and then somebody else takes over from him. It completely organically evolved. So that's just my quick takeaway from my experience in the team, at least from the leadership perspective.
For mainly what I was just a systems operator, and having the ability to be that systems operator, it was a very smooth transition to when I would start leading fire teams or squads. Having that knowledge of everything that they would be going through and all the problems that they might run into, it really helps on the back end for planning because I already know what that's like. So just having that experience is just awesome.
Just want to throw one more thing in there for the Navy side. We have a lot of collaterals as junior officers in any command, and collaterals are just additional duties to what you're normally doing. For this team, he mentioned that I ran our logistics. That was a completely side job. We all had 3-4 jobs on this team. which really taught us how to multitask and manage expectations for what we can and maybe need a little more help with doing, with delegating and all that.
Yeah, that's fair.
Awesome. I'm going to quote Bruce Schneier. If you think technology can solve your security problems, then you don't understand the problems and you don't understand the technology. That is going to be impactful because when I mentioned a stat earlier, we talked about within 1 hour. So these competitions are designed to last anywhere between 18 to 26 hours. So within that first hour, a lot of the midshipmen and cadets, as you go into a competition, are all gung-ho, ready to go, energized. They're, hydrated. They're not hungry. All the batteries are charged. They're ready to go. But what happens after hour 6 or hour 18, right? That really starts impacting your cognitive ability to start making decisions. So also within that first hour, about 80% of the technology that has been introduced to the team failed at that point. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the technology in the security areas. And the first question would be in regards to cybersecurity. So for Patrick Wilson, in one of the competitions, and with these competitions are typically Army versus Navy. Talk a little bit about what happened in the scenario when it comes to cybersecurity and how it turned a 18-hour competition, and you actually had us as instructors running around because the competition was pretty much done in about 4 hours, right? So we talked about security and technology. So go ahead and give us a little background and story on that one.
Right. So these technologies, right, are only as secure as we make them, right? And so what's being referenced here is an instance where we employ ATAC, which is the Android Tactical Awareness Kit. Typically runs off of an EUD. We always chest mounted them or wrist mounted them. And we would use this for battlespace awareness, planning, coordination, in conjunction with a mesh network. We would use this, but so would West Point. And in a particular instance, there was an engagement between Navy and West Point, simulated, of course, and West Point notionally died. And so we were able to do a little bit of SSE. We recovered their ATAC devices. And unlike us, they did not use passwords. So we opened up their ATAC, gained access to all of their battlespace awareness. We knew where all of their units were. We knew where all of their critical objectives and points were. We knew their route planning. And very quickly, we took their objectives and their locations, turned them into 9-line call for fires, and was able to very quickly strike them without ever having to engage with those objectives on foot or in person. Yes, they failed in that specific instance to secure their technology by just trusting that the basic, that they couldn't be compromised, right? That their technology was not going to fail. They did not take the extra steps or even believe that they would need that extra layer in that event. They were not able to zeroize their equipment before it was captured. Yeah.
So eventually an executive decision was made. We confiscated that ATAC from the Navy team in order to balance things out and kind of reset some of the things. Do you guys have any other contributions to that one during that event, or do you remember anything else? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so during that, we were split up. The main force was in a, I would say, 3x4 square mile area. And me, Ensign Wilson, and one other teammate were up in the northern section that was about, I would say, an hour drive away from the main effort. And our whole job was to clear a 2x3 area that we thought the objective would be in. Having the ability to get that information off their TAC devices and do that strike made it to where we didn't have to walk and clear 2x3 miles of woods. It was just a strike, BDA, and then we were able to leave a lot earlier.
Only if real-world intel were that convenient.
Yeah.
But you actually brought up another good point that I wanted to cover. One of the big challenges, especially we're in the Indo-PACOM AOR, is going to be the time-space problem. So we did introduce that to a couple of the scenarios. And Carson, if you don't mind going into how you guys did the planning and how you leveraged that time-space equation into decision-making factors as far as how your teams were set up and what the squad was comprised of.
So in the original planning, we knew that the main effort was going to be in the southern part. That's most likely where we thought everything would be. And we were right in that assumption. Main objective-wise, that was in that northern area. We were able to employ UAS to actually like go ahead of our small group and kind of clear a little bit more and just make it quicker for us to maneuver through these areas. We were also given a AI route planning tool right before we stepped off. So in transit, I was able to use that tool to make a route planning plan for the fastest way to go through it, the stealthiest, in quotes, way to go through it, and then kind of like a middle route. And from that, I was able to kind of plan around where I think the enemy would have been and use that route to just help us get along.
So Brandon, you did a lot of the planning when it comes to the AI route mapping. And just to give you guys a good idea of the land space, there are a couple of areas, in the Marine Corps that we leverage for mountain training or urban warfare training. There's a couple of positions at which they would locate where their headquarters are at. And some of these AI simulation tools that the team has leveraged kind of determine where contact would occur during certain situations or scenarios. Brandon, you did a lot of support and planning prior to the competition itself. Can you go ahead and walk through what the decision matrix looked like, and then also how you adapted to the environment as it changed during the competition itself?
Yeah, my background is in history, by the way, so I'm not technologically inclined at all. So when we were doing this planning, it was McCorson and a couple other guys who would actually go into the ATAC and the code and actually upload it. But what we basically did was we would compete with the AI unintentionally, where we would come up with a plan after analyzing our terrain maps and analyzing the West Point's team. Each squad was about 14 people, tacked on with whatever unmanned systems, whether ground or air as well. So we would take our strengths and weaknesses, compare them to West Point's strengths and weaknesses, and their tendencies in operations. West Point tended to be very static. They weren't very aggressive when we would go after them. They really liked to dig into one location and stay there. Or they would set up an ambush point with 2 or 3 guys and stay there, and it was almost always at the bend of a road. And we knew this, and so we would analyze our maps, and we would make a plan whether we wanted to hit them or we wanted to flank them or just completely bypass. And the AI program, we would feed all this in, and it would basically give us a red versus green rainbow of these are your likely points of contact, and these are your likely points of success. And oftentimes, what we planned relatively matched what the analysis did on the AI, because analysis would also go into actual terrain analysis. Looking at a map, you can see the gradient lines, but you don't really understand a very steep gradient until you're in it. AI can do that. It can analyze that and tell us, hey, you might not want to go into this ravine because climbing out is going to really suck. Me looking at a map, I'm not going to know that really until I get there. So using those tools and that pre-mission planning saved us a lot of heartache and sweat, and our knees probably as well. Andrew can talk about the technical side of actually putting that into our ATAC, so once we were getting snowed on, we could see it.
So I'm just going to back out just a little bit, right? So we're talking about this AI planning tool. Essentially what it was is just a series of waypoints placed out on the map. So an analyst or whoever that was responsible for loading that map up would take a look at all the waypoints, road intersections, buildings, blocks, trails through trees, and so on and so forth, right? And they'd load it in their model. They'd take the data from the previous competition where people had battle tracking on them, so we knew PLI roughly, and throughout the duration of the competition, that became your training data. They trained the model on it, and then it would spit out an analysis. The analysis was never like anything breathtaking. And like me being like just 20-year-old, I was like, wow, the AI so smart. It knows that the guy's going to use the big road in the middle of the town, and that was kind of like the immature first step into it. But then you take a step back onto it. Okay, well that means these models are at least capable of really fast human interpretation, right? I take some time, I look at the map, I draw the same conclusion that the model predicts within about a couple of seconds, couple of minutes too, right? That AI planning tool was a step towards another project where they were attempting to employ it on a autonomous unmanned ground vehicle that was armed. So essentially a sentry gun on the back of a robotic car. But it was supposed to be a force protection tool for the squad. So if we're all clustered in one area of the town, it's going to say, hey, this is the AO that the squad is operating in. Where can I go in and interdict enemy movement so that they can focus on actions on the objective? So for that case, that very baseline, like human assessment, it's nothing spectacular, but it's still another brain in the fight, right? There were 13 of us constrained at any one given moment to doing something in the fight, be part of the fire team, be part of the planning, operate an unmanned system, a drone. If you have an autonomous system with a baseline understanding, it doesn't have to be breathtaking, but it's another piece of processing that is interpreting information and creating outputs that you don't have to have a human even on the loop at that point, right? We saw the output, but if you put that into a black box, put it inside a UGV, and tell it, hey, go find the likely avenues of approach, go find those main roads that the bad guys are going to walk down. Okay, you can go do that, and then these guys can go focus inward and, like, you know, focus on fighting the main fight on the objective area. So that was just kind of like one of my outputs. Is like, you know, at first you get this like perspective of, oh yeah, there's nothing spectacular, but then you realize it's nothing spectacular, but it cost me, the human, nothing in that case. Does that kind of make sense? I don't know if I'm rambling a little bit here, but that was like one of the coolest parts I thought about it, and it came out in a lot of different like behaviors of unmanned systems. In that, like, they would do nothing spectacular, but it was that bit of autonomy that was introduced took something off of the human operator who is sitting in the snow, who is going hypothermic, who is maybe like tired from walking 2 by 3 miles through the woods. You have a little bit of cognitive load taken off of the user. But yeah, and I also made the maps, so it was cool.
All right, thank you for that. And part of the AI models, what we do for the competition itself, we follow the live virtual construct. So we built out the scenarios. We kind of went backwards, and then we went to a virtual area before actually deploying the midshipman cadets actually into the field. That significantly reduced on costs and planning, but also gave the midshipman cadets an idea of what the environment's going to look like as they go into their planning. For the virtual aspect, we had an entire room full of midshipmen, a bunch of computers and wires and cables all over the place. And what did we use for that? We used ARMA 3, right? So all these kids are sitting in a room, calling for fire, calling positions out, making tactical movements throughout the battle space. We've limited battery power to 20 minutes, and they've come up with very unique scenarios for deception planning and so forth. But Patrick Wilson did a lot of the planning, the technology behind that. So we'll talk a little bit about the ARMA piece and the virtual planning aspects.
Right. So for those of you that aren't aware, ARMA is a commercially available video game, right? It is a sandbox, first-person, third-person shooter where you can play the game in a number of ways, right? It has various modes. You can play from like a top-down perspective as like a commanding element, ordering real players around to do different things, or you can be a player itself on the ground in the fire team, right, all the way up in your different echelons. And what that allowed to do, and also has a massive modding base, so you can tailor the game through modding to what you want it to be. And what we built the game into is a simulator for the technologies that we employed in real life. Again, talking about the 20-minute battery life, right? In the game, you have these arcade-like characteristics for drones that can be controlled, you know, from across a number of distances, or like in forests, or, you know, places where you would run into degraded signals in real life. But you could model that with mods added on, and that's exactly what we did, right? We modeled battery life, we modeled degradation of signals, we modeled stamina and weight, and just all these different things that are factors for real-world operations. And then we took that and we employed like our new tactics and our new strategies and our systems in creative ways in the virtual world before we ever took it into reality, as sort of like a sanity check. And what we saw, because we could also scale it up to much larger training environments in a game versus in real life where we're limited by range size, range availability, so on and so forth. We're just funding, right? Exquisite technology and vehicles and all these things aren't always available. And so from there, we were really able to employ deception tactics. That was like the big thing that came out of our virtual experimentation. Deception tactics is the number one way of breaking down cognitive capabilities, and essentially it was always under the assumption that in the, help me out here, the kill chain for like the detect to engage sequence, right? The detect to engage sequence, like we always assumed that with all these sensors in play, we would be detected eventually. And so what we learned was give the opposition, the human, get into their OODA loop, give them something to detect and focus on, make a center of gravity around something that isn't actually their objective. For I think the scenario that we employed was a anti-ship ballistic missile, something like that. And the idea was, instead of defending the anti-ship ballistic missile directly, we would create these groups of infantry and drones and systems around places where you could employ something like that, but that's not actually where it was. And so we would center these around the actual location for our objective. And from that, West Point got in, they found our people, they found our systems, but they focused on these places where they were and was completely separated by distance from where our actual objective was. And so they spent the entire exercise duration trying to fight their way into these objectives where nothing actually existed. Whereas in the opposite, they actually focused their defense around their objective. So all we had to do was find one of their defending units, one of their defending entities, and then we just worked in from there, found their objective, and destroyed it. You want to add in on that?
Yeah, so, can you hear me? I think I lost. There we go. Awesome. So, with what he said, it was kind of a signature management problem in reverse. So, in his case, and he was the squad leader for this particular evolution. I was just an observing lieutenant back from TBS. We kind of make a customary pilgrimage back to come watch some of these competitions. So, it's exciting. I'm still passionate about it. I still love it. If I could, I would fly right back to Maryland, and go watch this again. But he from the midshipman perspective, they manipulated their own signature to draw in the attention of the enemy, and they used unmanned systems to do it. So you can apply that in a myriad of ways, right? You can use radios, you can use other kinds of MILDEC, things that I'm, not familiar with. I'm just a commo. But at this, organically developed, intrinsic understanding of, hey, we can manipulate our own signature and use these unmanned assets that, again, they cost nothing to the human user or the human people in the squad, and draw the enemy away and keep them away from the flesh and blood humans defending the actual objective. And then conversely, so another thing that happened in that exercise, I was in TBS, we were doing the platoon offense package, and I was getting movement to contact, learning the academic side of movement to contact and how company search and attacks work. And I watched them from, the control room, and I'm seeing how they're employing their UAS, and they're doing that naturally. So what they had done is they were in 2 steps, they were gaining and maintaining contact. They took their swarm of Group 1 tiny quadcopters and they just spread them across this training area. And then once they located where that West Point defense was centralized, they then start racking up to the Group 2 and Group 3 UAS to maintain that contact. And it was that same principle that I had just gotten in the classroom about 2 weeks earlier, and then, sort of haphazardly did in the woods of Quantico. But the theory and the principles that were in play there were now also in play with unmanned systems. And it kind of goes back to an axiom that one of our dear mentors, Major LeBrun, gave us as midshipmen. And it was warfighting is warfighting is warfighting. The exquisite, fun drones and the technology and the AI and the robots and the switchblades, it doesn't fundamentally change things. It changes the pace. It changes the volume. It changes the amount of information at play. But the human aspect is always there too, right? You can just use drones instead of people in a feint to draw attention away from a site. It's just maneuver. It's just information operations. regardless of how you employ that technology, like war being, sorry, this is a TBS and EWSism, but like war is that human environment, it's the clashing of wills. And they used their observations and their signatures to impose their will on those West Point cadets by just feeding them the wrong information using robots that cost them nothing and drawing in that offense. So I don't know, over to you guys.
We actually also did that flipped as well, where we, in the field, not in a virtual situation, but in a simulated training environment with simulated rounds, but with human beings and drones flying. Myself and one other midshipman were off like a mile away in some burnt out field in Quantico doing something completely different that we were tasked with doing. And then we got a call in for help from our squad leader that one of our ISR, intelligence surveillance reconnaissance drones, had seen about half of West Point squad moving towards our patrol base inside this Mout Town. Mout Town is basically like a fake city, if you don't know, that's built with cargo ship containers. And all of our other squad members were task saturated on a completely separate part of the Mout Town. So I, by myself, was called back, and working with my drone pilot, who's in a different area than I was, he was able to see West Point, and we saw that they also had a drone up. So I was bouncing around different buildings in one area, poking my head through a window and firing off some rounds in their direction to draw them into where I was. And I did this for about 2 hours until the sun went down. And we were able to see West Point actually see where I was in a building, redirect their force because they thought I was more than just one person. So I was able to bog them down for 2 hours so we could get the rest of our squad all consolidated back to set up a defense. And we were able to, once consolidated, and I sprinted back to meet everybody, hold them off by simply locking the doors of this building and locking the windows and going up onto the roof and using our belt-fed machine guns and our rifles to shoot down on the West Point cadets who were on the flat ground in the open. So they did that virtually, and then we did it live. And it was incredibly successful. And the biggest point, I think, for all of this is we have zero formal training. All of our training, whether it's the infantry skills from shooting, small unit tactics, CQB, to the technology side and learning about mesh networks, learning how to fly these drones, learning how to drop ordnance from drones, we taught that all ourselves and with the officers that were supporting the program. They really enabled us. They were never really telling us what to do or how to do things. They were a resource for us to ask them, hey, we don't really know what we're doing. We think this is our solution. And then they would say, yeah, sounds good. Or might not be the best idea, but go try and see what happens. And that was hugely empowering. And we learned everything by teaching each other. The Corson was super interested in the technology side. And our other best friend and I were very interested in the small unit tactics side and being in the nitty-gritty fight. But we weren't very technology oriented. So we were able to learn from each other very well because he would spend hours on his computer researching this one specific technology. And then he would be able to tell us it in a somewhat succinct way for my history major brain to be able to understand. And we were able to feed off each other. And we're 18 to 21 years old with no actual background in any of these things, getting taught all this, and watching the war in Ukraine actually reflect the tactics we're using. And that was very validating, seeing real problem solving that we did organically actually save lives or unfortunately take some lives in the actual war that was happening on the other side of the world, which was pretty eye-opening. And I think for all of us, made this program very real. We felt more that we were contributing to the world with what we were doing than just having fun in a club after school.
One of the main points I want to reinforce is that adaptive learning. So as Andrew McCorson was talking about their deception techniques, what happened later in the afternoon, the roles were reversed. And the Army had the defensive position. And when they were extracting, they actually employed the same deception techniques that Navy just did 4 hours prior to. And guess what happened? Navy fell for it. Big time. So they had a taste of their own medicine. But I think that's one of the key characteristics of this program, right? As they're learning in a virtual environment, that adaptive learning ability to be able to maneuver, to be able to understand your problem set, to understand and process within that short period of time what your decision-making ability looks like and how it impacts you and your planning cycle. Again, reinforcing the technology integration, right? There were a lot of technologies that were introduced to this organization, to this club. I want to say more than a dozen technologies. And when you look around this room in this conference area here, just think about how many of those technologies kind of overlap or partner with each other, whether you're talking about cyber, electronic warfare, signals intelligence. We got a lot of logistics support here. So as you go out and you have the 20-minute flight time of batteries, and you got that space-time problem, right? You got to go out an hour, 2, 3 hours away, and you're out of battery. You have to plan that as you deploy to the field. A lot of the lessons learned when it comes to contractor and contractor management were definitely over-promised, but this is where we opened the opportunity for them to learn. So talk a little about the learning curve. How complex was the technology that was introduced to you guys? And give us some scenarios of situations. I already see the look on your faces of like, what were the expectations? Now, remember, these are midshipmen that are in college. They have zero tactical training. And all of a sudden, you have this organization that comes in. Now, even though they're midshipmen, think about some of us older folks here and how intimidating some of the technology integration is as you look around with the vendors that are out there. How do you have that conversation? What does that look like? And I think that's important. So from your perspective, what did that look like? And how did that impact your decision-making to integrate a technology, depending on its complexities, into your plans?
Has anybody here flown a quadcopter before? Yeah? So you know how you have to do the chicken dance to sync it up? You have to get it all spatially organized. Now do that in a mount time in Quantico when it's like, I don't know, 2 degrees outside, and the batteries are lasting maybe 10 minutes because of how cold it is. That was a huge learning curve, learning how to actually set up the drones before you even use them. Because using a quadcopter, nowadays, not actually hard when it's flying. It's like a video game. You just fly it around and then you land it. But that setup time, having to redo that because it would lose link constantly. And then doing that dance constantly, literal dance. It felt like a dance when you're doing this. That was a huge learning curve for us that I think it's still plaguing the technology itself. I don't think there is like a solid solution yet to integrate those technologies in a battlefield environment where it's not a headache just to get it set up. If anybody else has anything,
I'll throw out one for you guys, and this is going to be a lead for Andrew. We had a very fancy octocopter, and it was tethered. It had really, really good capabilities, and they actually integrated. So we were in a very challenging terrain, a mountainous terrain, and when you look at comms, it's going to be very hard to establish that solid link in that relay. So in this case, we invited vendors to come out to, test their platforms because, of course, what were we told? We were told that, hey, this has been tested and proven. But what Andrew, talk a little about your decision process to circumvent when that technology wasn't working.
Yeah, so to rewind a little bit, what we were trying to solve was just communications coverage, getting good radio coverage across that terrain Lieutenant Commander Paramatalock was mentioning, right? So the solution that we came up with and to employ these systems was to get this tethered quadcopter and undersling a radio as its payload, and it was a Silvus Streamcaster radio. So it was going to take our COC, where I was manning at the time because the squad was out there, and it was going to relay command signals from ourselves up to the quadcopter and then down to the 3 electronic warfare platforms we had integrated into the squad. So talking about taking cognitive load off, my job in the COC was to man that, keep situational awareness of the signatures in the area, and then, as appropriate, attack or jam or spoof, so on and so forth. But that way, these guys didn't have to worry about it. They just had to carry the box. So we get there. Well, to rewind, early that year, they come out, they do a tech demo. They say, hey, we got this cool quadcopter. They show it. They launch it up into the air. They're like, oh, wow, we can carry 30 pounds with this. And they just kind of show it to us and then move on. And it's good. It's a proven technology, like Sir said. We don't hear from them, well, at least from the midshipman side, we don't see them for the next several months until the competition. And then they roll up. They're like, here's that octocopter. Okay, never taught us how to launch this thing, never taught us how to fly this thing, never taught us how to mount the payload or configure anything like that. Just showed up. Here you go. No, take that back. Like, actually show us how to do this. So they start to launch this thing, and apparently there's a GPS issue in the backwoods of Quantico, and it inverts and careens into the ground and takes the radio with it. So talking about adapting here, I'm like, ooh, okay, we have a team out there with electronic warfare devices and nobody to mind the control interface. So I got to come up with a solution to the problem really, really fast. So I went to the box that we keep with us, the little admin box, grab a roll of duct tape, run to the woods, grab the radio, the duct tape, and the biggest stick I can find, and then go tape it to a tent. And we got there. We did it. We penetrated like couple kilometers of foliage with I forget which frequency band we were operating on with that, but like, several gigahertz frequencies, and I'm able to see to the electronic warfare fight from my tent from my stick mounted radio. However, if the technology had been delivered and we had had time to integrate and we had done our due diligence and testing, we would have had a 400-foot mast instead of a 20-foot stick. So, to the point of like over promising and under delivering, like that was a real cognitive load at that point, because we were now suddenly, by relying on this technology, thrown into this situation where, oh, man, our entire plan has just gone out the wall because of this one chink in the armor, so to speak. And so the stick was the solution, but the stick should never have had to have been the solution, if that makes any sense. What else?
Yeah, we also had a Tacoma truck that had been modified to where you wouldn't necessarily need a driver in it, and it could target its own targets. It worked great 1 year, or it worked okay 1 year. It was still getting tested, but then the second year, I was the driver for it. So that's one of those other things where we expect to have one set of technology, and then it shows up, and actually, no, it's not going to take a load off your team. It's still going to be an asset because it's wheels and it's fast and it's got a 50 cal machine gun on it. But it's now just back to being a normal Tacoma, except the gas gauge doesn't work and the Prindle doesn't work right. And now you're thinking about all of that rather than where these West Point cadets are that you're trying to fight, and the contractors. Because something that we didn't mention either is that a lot of these engagements were not one-on-one, but rather one-on-one-on-one, where there was a third-party element that we also had to engage, and all of us were 14 people. There was no dominance by force for anybody. It was all equally matched, except with what you could do as a person. It was truly a competition in that sense. So having to deal with that truck not being what we thought it would be, we had to replan it a little bit. But we still ended up winning, so there was that.
Nice.
And there's something to, sorry, I don't know if you were.
Go for it.
Oh, and there's something to, like, when your guys are integrating with operators and talking to people. Like, at a certain point, the technology, right, the I believe button is pressed, and to a certain extent, it is a black box to that operator. But giving them as much of an understanding of the system and its behaviors as you can, it was immensely valuable to us. Like, we, for example, we were flying Skydios, and we didn't understand how the lost link behavior would act. We had our operator go down into a ravine, the Skydio loses connection, and what does it do? It returns to its landing, its launch point, which became its safe landing zone, and then like promptly crashed into a tree. And now we don't have to focus on the mission anymore. We have to focus on now going and recovering that Skydio so that it's not like, taken up and collected. And then, once that's accomplished, go back and reorient on the mission. So, just understanding in the first place that lost link behavior was going to be where it flew off, like to us on the ground at the time, it was like, oh God, it just flew off randomly in a direction. We didn't yet know that there was a safe landing zone procedure in the Skydio's programming. So at that point, it was a black box for us, and then we dug into it and we found out a little bit more about it. But making these systems as I guess not transparent, but as translucent as possible for the operator, it's immensely valuable to us as the end users. Not me anymore, sorry, but my time has passed.
All right. Earlier today, during the keynote presentation, Admiral Kohler emphasized the battlespace, and that speed is a driving characteristic of information, decision, and adaptation. Can you talk about a little bit about the war fighting functions? I know that was a little bit emphasized. How it helped develop your skill set into not only the OODA loop on what you're thinking and how that impacted the adversary's OODA loop, and then other lessons learned from EA, electronic attack.
I'll start that off. It was interesting learning that speed is everything, especially with these technologies. One of the lessons that we were taught by an older team member who is now a Marine was in one competition, West Point started on one end, Navy started on the other, and there was basically like a mannequin, kind of like a dummy to drag, and they had to get that. Well, instead of launching all these technologies and taking a tactical approach, they decided, I'm really fast, so I'm going to go sprint and grab it. And he did that. He just sprinted forward, grabbed it, while the other guys caught up and kind of made a layered defense. They didn't need technology for that. They just went. So that was another thing. Don't over-rely on technology. Don't let the technology dictate your decision-making. Rather, use it as a tool organically to enhance your decision-making. That was my point on that.
Yeah, I was a member of that fire team that went out and sprinted, and that was a deliberate decision. We had seen how West Point had been applying the systems, and there was a burden in the time to set up, time to employ, and get them operational. And we said, full speed ahead. We're gonna go take this. We're gonna go take this objective. The guys are gonna go form a really hasty defense and protect us. And then in that time, I think it was 3 minutes that we had elapsed for a round that was supposed to last an hour and would have lasted an hour if we had allowed that cognitive burden to kind of saddle us back down. But that was a technology that was really immature at the time. It was these little home built quadcopters that we were just dropping Nerf footballs out of at the time. Then you get to something like a Skydio or one of these more mature systems, and it's a plop out on its case, unfold the things, do a quick chicken dance with the remote, and it's synced and it's off. Whereas before, it would have been a more of a burden. So there's a certain point where yes, the technology can be burdensome and slow you down, but it can also lend you more speed. Because if they had a drone and they had seen where we were going and where we were sprinting off to, maybe they could have gained the intelligence and the information fast enough to interdict us and get out there and just said, hey, they're sprinting. We should sprint too. But they didn't have that information because they were, fuddling around with the tech that they were trying to employ. So, yeah.
With that cognitive load, the speed, paramount. But with cognitive load, one of the biggest things is figuring out when to just drop the technology and do something else. Was a big thing. Trying not to get frozen in that decision-making process, using that technology, whether you were trying to make a decision of whether to use the technology or not, or technology wasn't working and you were spending too long on trying to figure out how to make it work. So.
Yeah, and that was a major emphasis on the project for the standpoint of the other projects that were adjacent to us and supplying us the technology. It was do we even pick it up in the first place? And when we do pick it up, when and why? And what do we use it for? So, and I think that definitely threw a lot of people through the loop when we just abandoned everything. But, there was maybe a time and place for some of those, technologies. It just wasn't in that exact moment. So, yeah, cool.
So electronic warfare is a complex system that is out there involving physics, technologies, and then the integration as well as the use and the UI. There's definitely a lot of feedback that was provided to some of the vendors, some of the capabilities, especially when working with some of the platforms that are out there. Go ahead and share a little bit on what the learning curve was like for you going from zero to actually employing electronic warfare capabilities and making those decisions.
Is anybody here familiar with CACI, CACI, and their BEAM project, the Backpack Electronic Attack Module? That is primarily what our introduction was to electronic warfare as a concept, because we were given this technology and now we had to learn how to use it as an infantry squad. And having to learn all the concepts from electronic support, electronic protection, electronic attack, while also going through all of our classes. We had great 7 p.m. classes that we would do in our basement training room. And so we had to learn quite rapidly. I've gone through some EW courses now, and a formal course is very helpful. But I think what we did, being more ad hoc, was also equally effective because we actually took it out to the field and learned about how signals propagate in the environment rather than reading it in a NEATS module. We actually had to do it. You learn that a Baofeng radio doesn't really work well inside of a metal building or in the woods, but it works phenomenally well in flat ground and in the open. Whereas with the beams, just because you have an electronic warfare asset doesn't mean you're going to be immediately effective. It doesn't mean that it's going to identify an adversary drone up in the air. I think McCorson here has a story about electronic warfare and friend and foe identification. So I'll let him take that.
Yeah. I'm going to circle back just for a sec before I address my clear screw up. You know, as Lieutenant Commander Paramatalock kind of led off with, you know, this isn't an endorsement of any particular company, but CACI for us, I feel like as midshipmen and as users, like they really did it right. They had, I think one of the presidents come down and give us a class on how FISNT worked and how they kind of blew our minds with the crazy like slideshows, and they were just showing us like raw signal data, and then it kind of scared a lot of people at first. But then after that class, when the president, you know, wasn't a part of it, it was just some guys here to like really sit and, you know, talk to us. We got like down and dirty with each of the functions, how they worked, what the different types of jamming were, barrage, spot, sweep. We got like really into it, and then we understood the system that we were employing, like on a, I don't want to say like engineering level, but it was, you know, if we're talking about a pyramid here, like we're a little higher up on just like pressing buttons. We now understand the radio propagation, how signals work, the various signatures of various types of things like Wi-Fi versus like a drone control ground control station. We got to see a lot, and they really like kind of held our hand for a little bit just to show us what this thing was and what it was doing and why it was doing what it was doing. So just putting that out there, I felt like that was a great experience as an end user. Now, for my embarrassing story, basically I was in that tent, right, separated from the squad, and we're talking about how like, oh yeah, we're using these super cool mesh radios, and it's going to help us have the COC that's battle tracking, and it's got the air picture and the electronic signature picture. I saw a Skydio come up on the threat list, and I went buzzer on it, only to realize it was one of our squads. So that's the embarrassing story, but it was another thing in that just like clear human coordination, just talking through over the radio, being a little clear. It turns out like I talked to the squad leader hadn't talked to the fire team leader who had employed their Skydio that was attached to their fire team. And it's just human miscommunication influencing the picture, right? Warfighting is warfighting is warfighting. It was a human problem and not a technological one. So that's all for me.
Carson, you were an operator. What was it like for the process, the learning process?
Yeah, so I don't think I mentioned it earlier. I'm also a history major, and technical wizard stuff is not my area of expertise. So going into all this operator stuff, it was, again, yeah. So those presentations, they did honestly scare me a little bit. I was like, this is a lot of technical stuff that I'm going to have to learn that I really don't understand at all. But then having some of the classes where we just went out into a field and I was taught exactly what everything does while doing it, it made a lot more sense to me than just sitting and looking at a slide presentation of a whole giant EW spectrum picture. And then same thing with any aerial asset or ground asset. Same exact thing. Presentations look scary. And then actually employing them either with the contractors or just on our own, it's not as bad as I would have thought.
Any final comments? Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and I think what really set that group apart in their employment of this technology really was, yes, they taught us how to use it. Yes, they explained all the background about all the science that went into it and what is actually happening when you press XYZ. But they continued working with us throughout our employment, like throughout our competitions. And the buttonology actually changed when they noticed friction points. Like they would always push updates to us based on our recommendations. And so we went from having something that they think would work in the field to now something that the end users are confident in using and that is tailored to their needs, right? It's not just, again, it's not the I believe button, right? You start out a little bit there, right? But you ultimately are working with those end users to create something that's actually applicable in their domain. That's all I wanted to say.
Awesome. Well, thanks for the background and your stories. We went through numerous iterations from our side, from the principal investigator and the director side. There's a lot of coordination and lessons learned that we're taking back that help incorporate some of the doctrine that are being leveraged today. Just think about the time frame for a college student. They are there in an academic setting for 4 years. Almost 3 generations of technologies would have already been deployed to commercial spaces. And then what kind of learning curve is expected once you deploy these technologies and capabilities out there? So one of the things that we're doing, and this is a proven model, as you can see today, from accession to action, when you look at how we train personnel and how we educate them, getting that real world field experience is really what we're looking at in a model that actually works. And from day one, that's been my emphasis. From day one, I want to ensure that any officer we commission is ready to hit the battlefield. Because once you pin it on, there's no excuse and no reason at that point for you not to adapt, be resilient, and also understand the situation that you're going to be in as a leader. So those are the 3 driving points I mentioned earlier: resilience, adaptiveness, and influence. And I don't know, any other final comments you'd like to make?
Thanks for listening to us. We're a bunch of JOs.
And I think that's a really good point. For the future of warfare, right? These are potentially our future admirals, our future leaders. And for us older folks, we have to hand the baton over to somebody else. And this is what we're looking at. We're looking at a whole new generation. I listened to a talk recently, and when you think about the different generations, Generation Alpha is going to be a generation that has always had AI in their lives. So what does that look like? What does that look like for decision making? What does that look like for technologies? And that's something we want to take back for you guys to think about on how you're going to integrate these complex technologies and capabilities for the future generations and the future warfighter. Thank you.